Hello, lovely friend. I am Dr. Mary Barson.
And I'm Dr. Lucy Burns.
We are doctors
and weight management and metabolic health experts.
and this is the Real Health and Weight Loss Podcast. Hello, lovely friend. Dr. Mary here, and I am joined by the fabulous, wonderful, amazing Dr. Lucy. Lovely Lucy, how are you today?
I am awesome, Maz. Thank you for that little intro. If I ever need a boost, I'll just kind of ring you up and go, can you introduce me?
Anytime.
Anytime, I know. Oh, lovely. I wanted to tell you a little story about
Goats.
things that have been on my mind. Goats, yes. So there's 3 goat things that I want to chat to you about. One is that I actually have a goat. Her name is Saffron, and she lives out in the paddock. She's the cutest thing, and we've had her since she was a bubba, and she's really like a dog. So you toddle out to the paddock, and she comes barring up to you, and then if you sit down, she'll hop on your knee, and really she just super loves pats. She's a good goat. And we were in the last round of the 12-week Mind Body Rebalance in our coaching call. The coaching calls are fun. God, I love them. They are so fun. We were having a hoot, having a laugh. And I said to the peeps, oh, you guys are the goats. And there was all this people going, what are you talking about? And I realised that not everyone knew what a goat was.
Crickets were chirping.
Yeah. And I'm going, oh, and of course the Olympics had just been on. So I'm going, oh, goats, the greatest of all time. And I was saying, you guys are the greatest of all time. I was telling a story about how I'd called my daughter a goat because she'd brought me in a cup of tea, and apparently that's very uncool. So don't do that if you're hanging out with Gen Zs or whatever they are.
No, you have to embarrass your children, otherwise you're not parenting right.
Exactly. So then I was saying to them that, if you guys are the goats, then I must be a goat herder. And yes, we all had a big laugh. And then the next day, one of our beautiful participants then put a picture of a whole heap of goats in the Facebook group. And so then this just became this little thing, which is an interesting juxtaposition to my third goat, which is something I spend a fair bit of time, which is getting on my goat. It has been a favourite saying of mine that really gets on my goat. I don't know where that comes from, but honestly, the thing that is getting on my goat at the moment is influencers still talking about calories, and that there are people out there with huge followings, so massive ability to influence people, giving incorrect information. And that gets on my goat. It honestly does.
Calories has become something that it's just been absorbed into our culture. Everybody believes in calories, like children believe in the tooth fairy. And I think that it has done us a great disservice, because let's unpack now why the concept of calories in food, calorie counting, calorie restriction, why it's inaccurate, why it's unhelpful, and what are much better ways to approach health and wellness. And I just have to, the scientist in me just has to say this, that we don't even really question what a calorie is, but it's a fascinating story as to how we came to think about foods and how we nourish our body in calories. It's a fairly modern concept, only been around, really took hold, sort of 1960s, 1970s, but the concept of calories is just over 100 years old. But what it actually is, it's just a unit of measure, and it's the amount of energy required to heat 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So that's it. That's just what a calorie is. And it seems like a really abstract and unhelpful thing to think about with the food that we eat. And it actually turns out that it is, except that's not how human history has played out. And so let's expand a little bit more about calories in food and why everybody cares, and perhaps why they shouldn't.
Yeah. We've been sold this story. On its surface, it sounds reasonable, that if you eat fewer calories, so you consume fewer calories than you expend or burn, as the favourite phrase seems to be, then you will lose weight. That's the sort of summary of it. And, at some level it sounds reasonable, a bit like, if you want to become wealthy, you have to spend less money than you save. But there's a whole heap of stuff. I mean, and again, this is not a wealth creation podcast, but we know that for people who want to create wealth, it's not that simple. There's a whole heap of other things, that look at that. You look at bank fees, you look at investments, and you look at interest, and all of those are the things that determine ultimately your wealth. And it's a little bit like calories. It sounds so simple, but there's a whole heap of things that at play. The first of which is that unlike dollars, which are just a dollar, although I guess maybe we've got world currencies, so there is some difference. But a calorie in food, it's not even accurate.
No, not the way that we're told. It's not accurate. No.
No. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that calories are the only thing that we sort of refer to, particularly that phrase calorie deficit, which is another big thing that gets on my goat. If we wanted to use, so calories are a measure of energy, so a unit of energy. If we're talking about heating a room, we would talk about degrees, whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit. So you talk about degrees. If you want to cool the room, nobody says, I need to cool my room down. I'm just going to be in a degrees deficit. Look, people would look at you like, what?
Yeah, no.
I'm just going to be in a degrees deficit and that'll cool the room down. And it's like, and if we then move that analogy even a bit further on how that would look, well, then you would turn the heater down. So that's like having less calories. But then you could also open the windows. You might look at the insulation in your roof. You might think about whether you've got a thermogenic mass in your floor. And all of those will determine how fast you cool your room down or how fast your temperature deficit becomes effective. Sorry, not your temperature deficit, your degrees deficit.
Degrees deficit, yes, that's right. We never use that, turn it up, Yeah, I want a hertz surplus of that noise. It's not what we say at all. But calorie deficit, since calories are a unit of energy, then we could say, an energy deficit, a kilojoule deficit. And actually human bodies are never in an energy deficit whilst we are living. We're not. The definition of being alive is that one of the definitions of being alive is that we transform energy from one form into another. That's what alive things do, so that we can create all of those processes within the cell, the biochemical processes can keep going. That requires energy. And our beautiful, amazing, clever bodies will just burn the energy that they need, and they will burn the energy from food that we eat, and they will burn the energy from energy that is stored. And that is always happening. So there is never any energy deficit. There's no actual calorie deficit. But what is going on is that our bodies will access fuel from different places, from our food, from our fat, from our protein, from, in cases of extreme starvation, from, our gut lining. And what we can do is create a beautiful, nourishing environment internally for ourselves where it's easy for our bodies to access our stored fat as an energy source, because that is what it's there for. And our bodies are happy and healthy when we're able to burn that. But a great way to get yourself into that state where you can easily burn your stored body fat is by not counting calories.
Indeed. And I mean, it blows my mind. I can barely speak, but the extreme thing that people are missing here is that if your insulin levels are high, and let's face it, the majority of the world, particularly if you're over 50, but not necessarily so, if you are storing excess fat around your middle, then you are insulin resistant. And if you are insulin resistant, you cannot access your stored fuel. So it doesn't matter about these so-called calorie deficit because you can't get it. And then what happens? You're tired, you're hungry, you can't think, you're not functioning, you feel terrible. And so what do? You go and eat, and then you berate yourself for having no willpower. And the way I like to think about it is that if you're insulin resistant, it's like you're a truck. Let's say you're a truck that carries fuel. So you're a fuel tanker, and you'll have petrol or diesel. They probably have diesel in their fuel tank, and that'll take them so far. But you've also got this ginormous tanker on your back that's full of diesel.
That's like the stored body fat.
Indeed. So that's your stored body fat. And so as you're running out of fuel, you can't actually go and just get some fuel out of the tank. You have to go to the petrol station and you have to go and, get it from the service station. And so it's really interesting then that this idea that we can just tap into the fuel stores because we're in a calorie deficit, except they're not considering insulin levels. And it was interesting earlier on, Mez, you said that the calorie counting, which was created by this dude called Antwater, was done, it's fairly modern, although I would argue it's also fairly archaic because, so he discovered 120 years ago, whatever it was. But we also know that only 30 years ago, we discovered more metabolic hormones.
Yes. I guess what I meant is that animals are thriving all over the world without ever really bothering to count calories. So this is like a little, from that point of view, it's a modern imposition that we humans have placed upon ourselves. But you are right. From a scientific knowledge and understanding point of view of how human metabolism works, it is extremely archaic. This idea that we are simple buckets of calories is very, very archaic and not in keeping with our current scientific understanding, which shows that we are really complex biological organisms, and we've got complex hormonal interplays that control our hunger, satiety, our intake of food, and our use of fuel, and which fuels that we can use, whether it is, the fuel in our tank or the fuel that's in a big storage container on top of us. Or to use our woodshed analogy, whether it's the carb kindling that's there by the fireplace or whether it is the stored, logs of fat that are locked away in our woodshed and insulin is the lock. It's really complex. And it's so complex that reducing it to a simple argument of calories is not very helpful. But let's just imagine for a moment that even if you did believe, like you truly believed in, the caloric impact of food and you're like, nah, it's all about calories, maybe we could just debunk for a minute why, even if you believe in that rather flawed concept, even then, calorie counting isn't helpful because there is so much variation and inaccuracies about how calories are measured on and what is on the food label compared to the different energy that is required to absorb the certain nutrients. There's different variations in humans in how they absorb food. There's variations in our gut microbiome. So some different people with different gut microbiomes will absorb more energy or less energy. And there is also a role of our immune system. Lots of these individual factors make, the little label on the box really inaccurate. And Lucy, you were telling me as well about like how the labeling's worked out.
Yeah. So I think there's two things to think about. So, I like to stalk a lot of Facebook groups just to see, what the general public are thinking about, what are their pain points, what are their issues. And so many times I see people going, I'm in a calorie deficit. I'm only eating 1,200 calories a day, but I'm not losing any weight. Why not? What's wrong? And they think that they're doing something wrong. So the first thing is to unpack the food labeling system. So the way food labeling calculates calories per serve is based on the calories decided by this Antwater guy 100 years ago, that 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories of energy, and 1 gram of protein contains 4 calories of energy, and 1 gram of carbohydrates also contains 4. It's 3.9, but everyone rounds it up. And so they will then look at what's in their food and then go, our food has 20% carbohydrates, 50% fat and 30% protein, or whatever it is. It's usually the other way around. And therefore that's how we add up the calories. And therefore you've got, that's your calories. And people who are calorie counting are counting down to the last calorie, the accuracy of these, except, fun fact, they're allowed a 20% fudge factor. So even if you wanted to count calories and you're there diligently tracking every thing that you put in your mouth, there's a 20%. Like, it's massive fudge factor.
Imagine that. I'm going to go for a 5K run. I'll just round it up or down by 20%. We wouldn't do that. There's a big difference between running 6Ks and 5Ks for most of us.
If you're getting paid by your boss each week and he goes, plus or minus 20%. Like you just go, no, thanks. I'll just have the exact amount.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. So that's the first thing to note, that the labeling isn't accurate. The second thing that I think we should chat about is the accuracy of Antwater's calorie definitions.
All based on averages.
Yeah, so talk to us about that.
And there is no average food and there's no average human. So it's based on, averages of the percentages of the food, but it doesn't take into account all of the aspects that determine how much energy we can actually get from the food that we eat. And that depends on whether it's been cooked or not cooked, whether it's been ground or not ground. And the thermogenic effect, we've talked about this before, of some foods. So some foods it takes us more energy to be able to absorb them. So the net energy that you get is less because it took more energy to get the energy out of food. And things like foods that are higher in fiber, foods that are higher in protein have got more of a thermogenic effect. So it really varies. There is no average. There is no average person, no average food. And we know that whole foods, unprocessed foods, generally have got less calories available to us than ultra-processed foods on average. But even the variation within whole foods, there's a pretty significant difference between, you were saying before, it's like a ripe tomato versus an unripe tomato. Different variations of tomatoes have all going to have different amounts of calories that are available for us to consume. And then there's differences. Do you know, like people in Russia often have got longer intestines than people in other parts of the world, and that affects how much energy they can get from their food. Different gut microbiome. So in particular, the Japanese people are known to have quite different, on average, gut microbiomes than people from Australia, than people from America. And this changes how much calories and energy they can get from their food. So it's all really, really, it's a very flawed system for measuring things. And yet we are married to it. Married to calories.
And, I look and think, okay, and protein powders, extremely popular. I think that protein powders are extremely useful if you're underweight. If you're underweight, they're really helpful because you can absorb your protein really easily. If you're an Olympic bodybuilder or whatever, if you're just wanting to build muscle and you don't have any metabolic issues, you're not trying to lose weight, then probably protein powder supplementation can be helpful. But what's happened is that protein powders have been sold, if you like, as a weight loss solution. So I like to imagine that your body, to absorb the protein from, let's say, a piece of chicken, it has to eat the chicken. So it has to, first of all, it often has to prepare it. So that in itself means that your body is moving and you're, you need to use fuel to do that. You're then sitting down, you're using potentially a knife and fork, and you are chewing. Again, chewing creates enzymes. We've got to make those from scratch. We've got to, chew, that's a muscle action. We've got to swallow, more muscle actions. Again, all of these require energy. Goes into our stomach. As we're in the stomach, then more proteins are made. Enzymes are made to cleave these gigantic proteins down to smaller proteins and polypeptides, and then finally amino acids. And again, our body has to make all of that from scratch. And that requires energy. And that's okay, because you don't even know you're doing it. Like, how clever is our body? We're just sitting there and it's making all this stuff. So we can do all of that. And then as we're doing all of that, that creates some heat and again, increases our metabolic rate. So all of that's happening. And yet that is given the same caloric value as ingesting a protein powder, for which you don't need to do any chewing. It's already been cleaved. There's no enzymes being made. You barely need to swallow it. You just open your mouth and zip it, in it goes.
That's before we even talk about the insulin effect of both of those two different things.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. And so this is why calorie counting is so flawed. But the thing that gets on my goat so much is that there are people and influential people, particularly trainers, but not necessarily trainers. I recently was at a thing with another health professional and she made this great proclamation that the only way to lose weight is, in fact, the proclamation was, well, we all know that the only way to lose weight is to be in a calorie deficit. I felt like putting up my hand going, oh, no, we don't. We don't all know that because it's not true, but it wasn't quite the right forum. So it's really, really important, I think, that we keep banging this drum because the rhetoric that you can add up your calories and minus the ones that you use at the end of the day, and somehow you will magically be thin by doing this is just rubbish.
Yeah, and let's unpack that a little bit more. So why is calorie counting harmful and why is chasing a calorie deficit counterproductive?
Well, it's harmful because it's wrong and companies, Weight Watchers built an empire on various versions of calorie counting, whether it was points, portions, all of those things. These influencers are doing the same thing there. So it's harmful for that reason. But the ultimate harm, the long-term harm, is that if you follow this logic, several things will happen. One, you may well initially lose some body fat. And that's the thing, I think, that is, again, it's like gambling. You might put a bet on and you may well win the first time. And so you kind of get hooked into this thinking, oh, that must work. I'll keep going with this. But ultimately what happens is our body is clever. And if it can't access its stored fuel, it goes, right, well, what am I going to do? Because we've already decided you can't actually be in an energy deficit unless you're dead. So it's not going to let you do that. It is going to therefore slow down the things that it's doing, the things that it does while you're asleep, growing hair, replacing cells, making eyelashes, all those things that you don't even think about. Beating your heart won't stop that, but it will slow everything down.
Which is yuck and not trivial at all. That slowing down of your metabolic processes to match the reduced energy intake is not at all trivial. Like, people feel cold, people feel tired, people can have a low mood, dry skin, brittle hair. Like, it's not good. And the other thing is it can take a while to repair. And I do believe the science and my experience shows that it can repair for most people. It absolutely can. But it's not at all trivial. I think it's quite dangerous to our health and well-being. So you've got some fat stores that you would like to be able to burn. You'd like to be able to use your fat stores for energy, perhaps for health. Perhaps you want to get rid of the dangerous, inflamed, sort of visceral fat around your tummy. Perhaps you want to lose weight for other reasons. What is like a healthy, helpful and good way to be able to access your fat stores?
Well, I mean, the number one thing we need to do, again, is make sure insulin is low. Nothing will happen while your insulin levels are high.
It locks that woodshed.
Yeah. You can't get into your fuel tanker. You can't get into your woodshed. You literally cannot get your stored body fat while insulin is high. So that has to be the first step. And so I would love a phrase, rather than low calorie, why don't we talk about low insulin foods or low insulin recipes? Like, that would be a far more useful term than low calorie recipes, because you can have a low calorie recipe that's still very high in carbohydrate that will cause your insulin levels to remain high. And so you've then got basically this, you're eating low energy food that keeps your woodshed locked. And so all that is going to result in is you being hungry, because that's hunger is a sign for the body. It needs some fuel.
That's right. 100 grams of diet chocolate mousse is not going to have the same effect on your body as 100 grams of, salmon.
No. And even 100,
100 calories. Yeah.
Yeah, 100 calories. And we know this because this is why people who drink, sugary soft drinks, for example, which is the fastest way to get glucose into the body. It's you don't need to break it down. It's already broken down. It's easy to ingest. There's you don't need swallowing. And it gives you a massive insulin load, and then the energy is all absorbed, and then bang, you're hungry again. So one of the things that I think calorie counting neglects is the idea that different components of food will keep you hungry or not. So we want to have foods that keep us full for long periods of time. And I mean, it's so amazing to me because we have people who do our programs, and they have, done the dietary guidelines, 3 meals, 3 snacks. They've always had breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner. Some of them will have supper, but again, not everybody. So again, 5 to 6 times a day. They have never gone 4 hours without eating. And to do so feels so scary for them until they lower their insulin, eat foods that will keep you full, and mosey about their day amazed.
We get so many people saying that they're amazed that the hunger just isn't there, gnawing at them all the time by eating foods that are really satisfying, that nourish you and keep you full. It's wonderful. I was amazed the first time it happened to me. Walking past the ice cream aisle in the supermarket, I'm like, I don't want ice cream. This is unprecedented ever since I knew what ice cream was.
Back to my, health professional that I didn't call out in this forum, who was saying that the only way to lose weight is to be in a calorie deficit. She also said that will result in you being hungry, and that means it's working.
Oh, no.
Which is so dangerous because honestly, the thing with hunger's physiological. And
it's not a character flaw.
It's not a character flaw, and you can try and white knuckle your way through it, but eventually hunger will trump willpower. So if you're walking past that ice cream aisle and your body is saying, I need fuel, lady, I need fuel. Get me some fuel? And you're going, no. It's going to look at that ice cream and go, well, that's pretty quick energy. Why don't we get that? And your brain's going, no, I'm not doing that. I'm being good. No. If you're full, it's not going to keep reminding you that it needs fuel. It's not going to keep saying to you, what about this? What about this? It's going to go, I'm full, God. I'm full.
Excellent. Yep.
Excellent. Let's keep moseying by.
And that mental chatter, it's just quiet. So that's much quieter. So that's the first thing is that, yes, heal your metabolism, eat satiating foods, get your insulin under control, and then things are much quieter. And then what would be the next layer?
Well, then I guess, again, we're thinking we're wanting to use is an easiest word, use our body fat. That's what we want to do. That's what lots of people want to do. So therefore we go, all right, well, now we've now got access to it. And now the things are over time. And again, lots of us have done 30 or 40 years of trying to count calories, and we've developed various mindsets and we've got various cultural things. And so it's often unlearning some of those stories. And I thought we should talk about that next week as well. And we mentioned it last week in our mindset episode, but next week I thought we'd also talk about motivation, but understanding how your body works and tuning in. Again, we have never done that. Tuning into your hunger, tuning into your satiety, not eating just because it's morning tea time, not eating just because it's lunchtime, actually eating when you're hungry. And I cannot tell you how much better food tastes when you're a little bit hungry. Not overwhelmingly hungry where you could almost eat your arm off, but just that little bit, which, again, it's working up an appetite. People used to use that phrase all the time, and now we don't.
Love it. So, gorgeous ones, don't stress too much about calories. It's much more about food quality than quantity. And if you can choose what you eat and when you eat, and then your body, with its natural, normal hunger signals, ultimately will decide how much you eat.
Yes. And if you're following a fitness influencer who starts showing you a video of a bucket of water and telling you that all you need to do is put less into the bucket than you pour out, then run. It's a red flag. They don't know what they're talking about. They've simplified it down to basic language that's wrong. It will be the hill that I die on, honestly, this just calling out fitness trainers. It's particularly trainers, but as I mentioned, not necessarily trainers, but anyone who even uses the phrase calorie deficit, unless you're talking about a dead person, is wrong.
Your poor goats, Lucy. They're still getting
I
at them.
I know. I'm on my goat. Getting on my goat. I'm on my high horse with my goat.
Protecting your goats. Yep. Well, I think you're the goat, Lucy.
What a lovely segue to finish. All right, gorgeous listeners, thank you so much for joining us again today. And hopefully we have helped you just uncouple yourself from calorie counting and recognize that it is not as simple as calories in, calories out. Weight loss is chemistry, not maths. It's hormones, not calories.
Absolutely. See you later, gorgeous one.
Bye for now. The information shared on the Real Health and Weight Loss podcast, including show notes and links, provides general information only. It is not a substitute, nor is it intended to provide individualized medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor can it be construed as such. Please consult your doctor for any medical concerns.